My name is Natalie and this is my market garden, Ladybug Lane. I am in my second year of production and I grow all of it by myself. I'm a one-woman operation. I don't use any machines, no tilling. I use all hand tools. I work all the labor myself. I attend 2 farmers markets where I sell all of my produce direct to consumer. I live in north central Texas. This year I'm growing a lot of tomatoes and herbs. I do a fresh herbal tea. If you haven't tried herbal tea, it's really delicious. Fresh, you get a lot of different flavors. And I grow everything with no pesticides, no herbicides, all plant-based fertilizers, local compost that I get from the city with recycled materials. So I became really interested in how our food system works about 5 years ago. I went into a little bit of a deep dive about what kind of pesticides are used to grow our food and what kind of practices are used, and it got me really interested in small farming and how small farms work. I think that America is losing a lot of small farms, and it's really important for backyard growers like myself to step up and close the gap between, mega farms and garden operations. So I think that if we had more small farms like this is a 1/4 of an acre. If we had a bunch of 1/4 acre farms, like 50 in the county, then we could completely supplement a large portion of our vegetables. I grow a lot of local flowers. But I think it's really cool that you can actually grow more food per acre on a small operation because you're managing it so much more intensely, and because I have a space that I can tend to, on a week-to-week basis. Every part of the farm gets my attention. I can stay atop pest control and weed control by hand, and I don't have to spray chemicals. And the customers I have really love that I offer that sort of thing. So the biggest challenge is definitely management and not letting it run away from you. So in my first year, last year, I grew a lot of different things. I had over 25 crops that I tried. Here in North Texas, we can grow a lot of long season vegetables like sweet potatoes and watermelons, hot peppers, things that take a lot of heat and a lot of time. But I've learned that's not necessarily right for a small farm market garden like this, because you only have so much space. You want to use your space wisely, and you want to fill it with things that are going to be a little more productive. So that's something that I've learned, is honing in on the vegetables and herbs that I can harvest a lot of and that people want to buy, and not waste my time doing fun things like watermelons that aren't necessarily gonna pay their rent in terms of the space and time that they take. But in terms of my own personal garden, growing things like watermelons is really fulfilling because it tastes so much better. So that's another thing that I've learned in this journey, that vegetables that you grow yourself taste a whole lot better. And when you don't use pesticides and sprays, and you can use varieties that don't necessarily keep for a long time like they would grow at the grocery store, they just taste a lot better. I have customers say, I don't like tomatoes, and I'm like, hold on, let me, give you a taste of this cherry tomato, and 9 times out of 10 they're like, wow, this is really delicious. So when the farms around the country, or even in other countries like Mexico, or even across the oceans, grow food for our grocery stores, they are meant to be preserved for a really long time. So you might get a strawberry that's red, but that strawberry never really ripened, because if it had ripened, it wouldn't stay long enough for the time that it needs to spend in a grocery store. So I love to tell people that, my stuff is all picked 1 day or 2 days before market, and that allows it to be so fresh. It keeps for still a pretty long time, like 2 to 3 weeks in the fridge. But it's just, you cannot deny the difference when you taste homegrown vegetables. Something I've looked a lot into is called IPM. It stands for Integrated Pest Management. And it talks a lot about how your pests actually build your ecosystem. So you have to have the aphids to bring the ladybugs. So it kind of changed my mind about what pests on a farm really look like. So I only consider something a pest if it is completely eating my crop to the degree that I can no longer bring that crop profitably to market. So for example, I had a lot of harlequin beetles on my kale crop, and it was late in the season. They often show up when the plants are stressed anyways, so the kale was kind of at its end of its life, and I wanted to leave it there because kale does supply the pests for those good insects like ladybugs. And so instead of ripping it out or spraying poison or just being done with it, I got a little handheld vacuum. I was vacuuming up the harlequin beetles. It totally worked, and I was able to preserve my kale and leave it so that the other good beneficials could show up and I wouldn't be taken over by those harlequin beetles. But I have to reiterate, some amount of pests is okay. It's pretty natural. I like to tell people it means your food is edible, and it's only a problem if it's completely decimating it, or really causing a lot of damage to the point where it's not going to be financially viable. In terms of weeds, I have a lot of grass because I set up my farm where there used to be a lawn. So instead of spraying herbicides, spraying the food, I just pull a lot of the grass and I coexist with the grass. And at the end of the summer, it always kind of takes over, but I'm still able to grow what I want to grow. And nothing around here is my enemy. That's what I like to say. The grass is only growing because there's an empty spot. The bugs are only coming because I'm growing, lots of calories worth of food that draws in insects from the environment. And I've invited them all here, and nothing is an enemy. And everything that's here is meant to be here. Yeah, so there's a couple ways that a small farmer like me might sell their products to the community. So direct to consumer at farmers markets is only one of the ways you can do it. I've dabbled a little bit in wholesale, which is where I sell to a grocery store. And you could also do, you pick operations where people come and visit and they pick the vegetables themselves. You could do a roadside farm stand in which you make a little building, you put your produce out on the side of the road, and then people come and buy it. So there's a couple pros and cons. I like farmers markets because I love to directly interact with my consumers. I love to tell them about how I build my ecosystems without using pesticides, and how I pick everything myself, and there's no tilling and there's no machines and it's just me. Something else that you have to think about when you're doing small farming is how you're going to price your produce. So unfortunately, to have such a beautiful operation, I have to price my produce pretty high, higher than you would buy vegetables at a grocery store. But this year, actually, I joined a market that has SNAP EBT government benefits. So you can use your SNAP dollars to buy vegetables, fruit, tea, and we also do Double Up Food Bucks this year. So in the state of Texas, we have this program called Double Up Food Bucks, and it means that your SNAP benefits can be doubled if you're going to use them to buy fresh produce at the farmer's market. So that allows people of all, economic situations to participate in the local food system and to be able to access my produce even when I set it at a higher price. So this means the government's intervening, paying for the benefits to both get me the wage that I need to continue my operation and also allow the customers to afford the vegetables. I also accept WIC benefits, which stands for Women, Infant, Children. So that is another kind of government benefits that allows people to access my food. And that is just a really good in-between system in which I can get the wage I need and people can buy the food. So something that I've learned on my farm and I want more people to know about is that growing plants isn't really that hard. When you give them the right soil and the right amount of water and the proper nutrients, when you use good quality plant starts or good quality seeds, you can actually grow a lot. And people will say to me, how did you get such a green thumb? how did you, become such an expert? And I tell them that I'm not an expert and I don't think I have a green thumb, but it just takes a little bit of practice to make sure you're not overwatering or underwatering. You got to get good quality compost and soil, so I do a deep compost method where I layer a lot of compost to make rows on top of my native soil. And I like to tell people, don't buy the compost from the Home Depot. The cheapest stuff you're gonna get is just mulchy. It's filled with plastic and just really low quality ingredients. So you wanna look for a more bulk source of compost, either at a landscaping facility, or I get mine from the city recycling program, somewhere where they can deliver a couple truckloads and you can get it for a lot more quantity at a lower price. You gotta have a good watering system, so I do all drip irrigation. Drip irrigation helps save water because you're not wasting water spraying overhead sprinklers on the other plants that might not need it. Not to mention that crops like tomatoes behind me don't appreciate having overhead water sprayed on their leaves all the time. It's nice for them to have the drip applied directly to the roots. So it saves water from less evaporation, and it's also, I put it on a timer so that I can turn it on to come on right before the sunrise so it can really sink in there without evaporating in the hot Texas sun. The other thing that you need is good quality plant starts. So plants you get from Home Depot and Lowe's, big box stores if you will, are not going to be good quality. They're going to be over fertilized, and that's why they're usually really, really dark green. They've been stunted in their pots. They've been in their pots a long time. So I recommend getting your starts from the farmer's market if you can, local plant stores, or you can start them from seed yourself. That takes a little bit of practice, but there's plenty of plants like the zinnias in front of me that you can just toss out the seeds from the packet. You don't need to start them as transplants. So if you've never grown a garden and you want to try, I'd say zinnias are a really easy flower to start with. Herbs like basil and cilantro are really easy. Even tomatoes are pretty easy. And just give it a try, see what you can do. Even if you're inside, you can try a couple different things to grow food inside. But just give it a try. Don't be scared about having a brown thumb or anything like that. You can do it. Yeah, so in terms of the skills that you need to run a small farm business, I'd never been self-employed before. So for me, becoming self-employed was learning a lot about myself, about my work habits. How much can I push myself to work? Working 40 hours a week on a farm is a little different than working 40 hours in the office. My back gets sore from shoveling, or, I have to get up at the break of dawn to beat the heat. So something that I've realized is if you're going to work a job like this, going to work for yourself, you need to go low and slow. You need to work at a lower intensity so that you can work, most of the week. I'm pretty strict about taking one day off a week to allow myself to do house tasks and rest and sleep in. So for me, that's usually Mondays because I work markets on the weekend. But don't push yourself, don't be out here, shoveling if it's too hot, take the afternoon inside. But pace yourself so that you don't get burned out on it. Also, don't put too much of your heart into the plants because things die all the time. I kill vegetables all the time, so you can't get too attached in a way that makes you feel like you won't be able to continue if your favorite little Cosmo plant dies, because sometimes it just happens. So I recommend treating everything as a learning experience. You can always get better, you can always get worse. Just keep on trying new things, experimenting. I will say the information you see on the internet about gardening is only as good as the people producing it. Pay attention to the experts, pay attention to the extension agencies that publish information. They know what they're talking about, and take everything you see on the internet with a grain of salt, and be willing to try out things that people might say you shouldn't do. Everyone's climate's different, everyone's soil's different, there are microclimates everywhere, so behind me there's a bunch of trees, over here gets a little more shade. Might be different from that side of the yard that gets a little more sun. You know, always be willing to experiment and always go forward with curiosity. I do think everyone can make a difference. Something that my farm has showed me is that even a little plot of land like this can way increase the amount of insects that are here, for example. Bringing a lot of plant biodiversity will bring insect biodiversity. It will bring small mammal biodiversity. I mean, once you start at the base, which is the plants, which is the soil, you can do so much to increase, you know, the pollinator population in your neighborhood. And something that I have read is that backyard gardeners are making a difference in the resurgence of pollinators, not just honeybees, but native bees, native insects, even the ones you might not like as much as butterflies, you know, small beetles, worms, that kind of thing. You can always make a difference. And even growing one flower, I mean, you will see insects that will come to this flower that might have not been there before. So, you know, plant the garden, the insects will come, the life will come, and you can definitely make a difference.
Where could we find you if we want to learn more about you?
So I have an Instagram and a Facebook at Ladybug Lane Veggies, and I also have a website, ladybuglaneveggies.com. So you can reach out to me there. I'm always willing to speak to anyone who's interested, answer questions, share my experience. You know, it's all about just trying it out and getting people involved in even the smallest ways.